Have you ever wondered why some of the wisest, most spiritually gifted people you know weren't necessarily top students in school? Why they struggled with focus, questioned authority, and often felt completely out of place in traditional education? What if that struggle wasn't a sign of failure, but a sign of calling? What if the very things that made them different were clues that God had set them apart for something far greater than a grade? Before we dive in, if you've ever felt like school didn't reflect your worth, if you've ever sensed you were meant for more, you are in the right place. Take a moment to subscribe to Bible Peak, the home for those walking in divine purpose. And boldly comment below, "I receive the power to walk in my divine calling." Let your declaration be a signal to heaven that you are stepping into who God made you to be. The world measures intelligence in one way through grades, degrees, and standardized tests. But the kingdom of God operates differently. The chosen ones, the spiritually gifted, the deeply intuitive, the awakened souls often find themselves completely at odds with the structure of traditional learning. And there's a reason for that. Their minds were wired not for memorization, but for revelation. From an early age, chosen ones learn differently. They're not drawn to repetition and rigid structure. Their minds stretch beyond the confines of classrooms and into the mysteries of life itself. While their classmates thrive on textbooks and formulas, chosen ones often need stillness, space, and meaning to absorb anything. They're contemplative, observant, and deeply intuitive. They don't just take in information, they process it. Spiritually, Isaiah 55:8-9 reminds us of God's unique design. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." This truth is reflected in how chosen ones think. Their learning style is non-linear. While others follow point A to B to C, they leap from A to Z, connecting concepts others miss. What looks like distraction is often deep spiritual processing, and because of that, many chosen ones struggled in school, not because they were incapable, but because they were being shaped for a wisdom not found in textbooks. From the outside, they might have seemed like underachievers, but internally, they were forming insights that would one day heal, guide, and awaken others. Another reason they didn't shine in school: they questioned everything. Where others memorized, they investigated. Where others followed, they challenged. Not out of rebellion, but out of a deep hunger for truth. They were never satisfied with surface-level answers. They had a longing to understand the why behind everything. And because of that, they often clashed with systems built on conformity. Luke 2:46-47 shows us that even Jesus, as a young boy, sat among the teachers, listening to them and asking questions. The spirit of the chosen is always seeking not just knowledge, but divine insight. And that hunger doesn't always fit into a school curriculum. While their peers were focused on historical dates or math formulas, chosen ones were thinking about purpose, meaning, and eternity. From a young age, they were drawn toward the spiritual, the unseen, the eternal. They pondered existence, questioned the nature of life, and searched for the hand of God behind all things. What others dismissed as daydreaming was often deep communion with truth. This hunger for spiritual knowledge created a disconnection from traditional learning. School felt empty. Essays felt irrelevant. Tests felt like a cage. And so they struggled to stay motivated. Not because they were lazy, but because their souls longed for something more than tasks and trophies. Ecclesiastes 1:13 says, "I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens." The chosen are seekers. But what they seek goes far beyond what is offered in a classroom, and that leads to another truth. They rejected meaningless tasks. For the chosen, energy is sacred. They are not driven by external reward, but but by deep internal purpose. If a task lacks meaning, they simply cannot engage. They're not built to chase empty success. They're built to carry sacred assignment. When asked to memorize or complete something that held no emotional or spiritual value, their minds would shut down. What looked like disinterest was actually discernment. What seemed like laziness was spiritual resistance. Their energy would not flow where their spirit was not present. Then there's the emotional and energetic factor. Schools are often filled with pressure, performance, and comparison. For sensitive souls, this can be overwhelming. Chosen ones are spiritually attuned. They sense tension in the room, the stress of others, even unspoken fear. And this constant flood of energy can be exhausting. While others were focused on grades, chosen ones were often simply trying to survive emotionally and spiritually. Psalm 34:18 tells us, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." God was never far from you in those moments. Even when you felt unseen or misunderstood, He was shaping you for a calling far greater than any diploma. Many chosen ones also struggled because they saw through the illusion. They instinctively knew school wasn't the full picture, that life wasn't about tests and GPAs. They knew in their spirit that the path to purpose wasn't paved with gold stars, but with courage, faith, and a connection to God. This is why they never fully bought into the system. They didn't need validation from man because they were already known by heaven. They didn't chase grades because they were called to chase truth. They didn't fit the mold because they were born to break it and rebuild it through kingdom principles. And while they may have seemed like daydreamers, always often thought, distracted or disinterested, they were actually accessing realms others couldn't see. Their minds were dancing with visions, with spiritual revelations, with heavenly blueprints. Their imagination wasn't a weakness. It was the soil of their divine purpose. So, if you were one of those students who couldn't focus, who didn't excel, who felt misunderstood, know this. You were never meant to conform. You were never supposed to shrink to fit the system. You were always set apart for something more. Once a chosen one begins to understand that their struggle in traditional systems like school was not a sign of weakness, but of spiritual wiring, everything begins to shift. What was once viewed as failure now becomes evidence of divine design. The inability to conform wasn't a flaw, it was protection. Because God never intended for His vessels to be molded by the world. He intended for them to be molded by His Spirit. Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." That setting apart is not always comfortable. In fact, it often feels like rejection, isolation, or even shame. Especially in youth, when identity is fragile and belonging feels like everything. But chosen ones were never meant to fit in, they were meant to stand out. And once they embrace that truth, the gifts hidden beneath their early struggles begin to rise to the surface. One of the most powerful outcomes of not fitting into the school system is the development of deep inner perception. Because they didn't rely on external validation, chosen ones turned inward. They developed introspection. They learned to observe, to sense, to feel on deeper levels. While others memorized facts, they were analyzing energy. While others competed for attention, they listened for truth. This made them highly empathetic, not just emotionally, but spiritually. They could sense when something was off. They picked up on tension without a word being said. They carried the pain of others without being asked. And while this made them vulnerable in their early years, it became their greatest strength later in life. This heightened sensitivity often manifested as creativity. Music, writing, drawing, movement, these weren't hobbies. They were spiritual outlets, ways to release what couldn't be said, ways to heal what couldn't be explained. Their creativity wasn't about talent. It was about translation, translating heaven into art, emotions into beauty, pain into purpose. But because the system didn't know how to measure this kind of intelligence, it often labeled them as unfocused, indisciplined, or underachieving. Teachers saw a restless student. God saw a prophet in training. Isaiah 32:21 says, "Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you, saying, 'This is the way. Walk in it.'" That inner voice grew louder as chosen ones aged. They began to realize that while others were educated by books, they were being educated by experience, by suffering, by failure, by faith. They learned not just information, but revelation. And that revelation became the bedrock of their calling. In time, the very things that got them labeled as difficult became their superpowers. Their refusal to blindly obey became leadership. Their questioning became wisdom. Their sensitivity became discernment. Their imagination became vision. What the system rejected, heaven anointed, and here lies a sacred truth. God often hides his greatest gifts in the most misunderstood people. He allows them to be rejected early, so they will not be dependent on human applause. He lets them walk through shame so that they can carry compassion. He delays their recognition so that when it comes, they know it was never about them. It was always about him. Romans 8:28 tells us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Even the detentions, the failures, the days of confusion and doubt, God used it all. He turned rejection into redirection. He turned silence into stillness. He turned failure into formation. Eventually, chosen ones begin to see their education wasn't wasted, it was just different. Their classrooms were pain and patience. Their textbooks were hardship and healing. Their teachers were heartbreak and the Holy Spirit. And the diploma they received wasn't handed by men. It was written in heaven, confirmed by fire. As they mature, they start walking in rooms that once intimidated them. They begin teaching people who once overlooked them. They write books, speak truth, build ministries, lead movements, not because they studied harder, but because they surrendered deeper. The memory of those school years doesn't bring shame anymore. It brings understanding. It explains the silence. It redeems the struggle. It honors the journey. Their story becomes a testimony, a light for other misfits, creatives, dreamers, and visionaries who felt like failures simply because they didn't thrive in a system never built for them. What they once tried to hide, they now hold high, because when God breathes on a soul that was crushed by the world, he raises up a voice that cannot be silenced. And that voice begins to declare, "You are not broken. You are chosen. You are not lost. You are set apart." The life of a chosen one is rarely smooth. From childhood, their experiences seem more intense, their emotions more raw, their questions more endless. They carry the weight of knowing they are different, even when they can't explain why. And for years, this difference often feels like a burden. But what the world sees as brokenness, God sees as a blueprint. What others call wounds, heaven calls weapons. Psalm 147:3 says, "He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds," not just to mend them, but to use them, because it is from those very wounds that the deepest compassion grows. The most powerful voices are not shaped by success, but by suffering. And chosen ones, having walked through rejection, confusion, misunderstanding, and failure, begin to realize that nothing they went through was wasted. God allowed the fire, not to destroy them, but to purify them. The pain that came from being misunderstood in school, the embarrassment of not fitting in, the internal chaos of feeling less than, all of it becomes fuel for ministry, mentorship, and meaning. Where others teach from knowledge, the chosen teach from experience. And that is what makes their impact undeniable. When they speak, hearts listen not because they're eloquent, but because they are real. When they write, souls are stirred not by perfection, but by truth. When they pray, atmospheres shift not through volume, but through authenticity. 2 Corinthians 1-4 reminds us, God comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. The struggle gave birth to the gift. The rejection built the resilience. The shame cultivated humility. The silence taught them to hear the voice of God when no one else was speaking. And once they step into this awareness, the chosen begin to walk differently. They stop apologizing for their uniqueness. They stop explaining their process. They stop needing permission to show up in rooms they were designed to lead. They no longer wait for validation, they carry revelation. This is the divine reversal. The one who was overlooked becomes the one others seek out. The one who was silenced becomes the one whose voice now carries healing. The one who was excluded becomes the one building tables of inclusion, of belonging, of spiritual nourishment. And it's not done with bitterness. It's done with love. Because chosen ones do not lead from ego, they lead from overflow. They don't need to prove themselves. Their presence speaks. Their peace speaks. Their process speaks. As they continue to heal and grow, they begin to identify their assignments, the people they're called to, the wounds they're meant to bind, the lies they're called to break, the chains they're assigned to destroy. This doesn't always come in the form of a pulpit or a stage. Sometimes it's through writing, creating, parenting, counseling, business building, mentoring. But no matter the form, the function remains to release what God has placed inside them for the benefit of others. And the best part, it comes naturally. They don't have to force it. It flows. Because when divine purpose is unlocked, it no longer feels like work. It feels like worship. Romans 12:6 reminds us, we have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. Chosen ones begin to see their past differently. What once seemed like random chaos now looks like preparation. Every detour was a redirection. Every loss a lesson. Every heartbreak a doorway to deeper love. The learning they once lacked in classrooms is now happening in sacred encounters. Through prayer, reflection, revelation. They're being educated by the Spirit daily, deeply, thoroughly. And the insight they carry now surpasses what any system could have given them. They begin mentoring young people who feel the same misfit ache they once did. They write books, lead retreats, build programs, or simply live lives so full of grace and power that others begin to ask, how did you become like this? And the answer is always the same, God. God took what was misunderstood and made it miraculous. He took what was dismissed and made it divine. He took what looked like loss and turned it into legacy. And because they know the cost of their calling, chosen ones carry it with reverence. They don't see their gifts as status symbols, but as sacred trusts. They know the enemy tried to destroy them early, not because they were weak, but because they were dangerous to darkness. And now, having survived what should have taken them out, they walk with an authority that cannot be faked. They've been through too much, seen too much, prayed too hard, bled too deeply, and still they rise. So if you have scars, if you've been misunderstood, if you've questioned your worth, know this: your scars are sacred, your journey is holy, and your impact is still unfolding. There comes a time in every chosen one's journey when the hiding ends, when the struggle finds its purpose, when the pain finally makes sense, and when the question, "Why me, Lord?" transforms into "Use me, Lord." This is the moment when calling becomes lifestyle, when divine alignment becomes the compass for every decision, and when the misfit steps boldly into the light, not for attention, but for assignment. You no longer carry the shame of being different. You wear it as your mantle. You realize that all the confusion, the setbacks, the silence, they weren't punishments. They were preparation. You were never forgotten. You are being formed. Isaiah 62:1 declares, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." Chosen ones are not called to blend in, they are called to arise. And that rising doesn't always look dramatic. It starts with quiet obedience, with small choices that align with heaven's heartbeat, with daily surrender to something greater than the self. Now you begin to live differently. You no longer chase purpose, it becomes who you are. You don't compartmentalize your spirituality. It's not something you do on Sundays. It's woven into your conversations, your business decisions, your relationships, your creativity. You carry the presence of God into every room you enter. You speak with a voice that has been tested by fire and refined in silence. You lead not from arrogance, but from authenticity. You no longer need to be right, you aim to be real. You listen deeply, love without fear, and give without needing credit, because you know where your reward truly comes from. Colossians 3:23-24 reminds us, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. The chosen understand that the platform is not the goal. Obedience is. Influence is not the prize. Impact is. And true impact doesn't always look like followers or fame. Sometimes it's planting seeds no one sees. Sometimes it's being faithful in hidden places. Sometimes it's comforting one person who felt unseen until you spoke. And this life, this sacred walk, requires constant refueling, because the more you pour out, the more you must be filled. So you protect your time with God like a treasure. You guard your peace like a gate. You say no more often, because every yes must align with your assignment. You begin to crave simplicity, silence, slowness, not because you lack ambition, but because you've tasted the richness of being led by the Spirit. Noise becomes repellent. Drama feels foreign. You choose depth over hype, presence over performance, and even as your influence grows, your heart stays bowed. You remember the days you almost quit, the nights you cried in silence, the rejection that broke you, and you carry it with gratitude, not as baggage, but as testimony. Revelation 12:11 says, "They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony." Your story isn't a liability. It's your weapon. Every part of your journey, the school days where you felt invisible, the times you doubted your worth, the failures that nearly crushed you, all of it is now part of your message. You no longer try to appear perfect. You are powerful because you're transparent. People don't follow your highlight reel, they connect with your humanity, and through your life, God begins to reach others. You become a mirror, reflecting to them what is possible when you choose surrender over striving. You inspire not by what you've accomplished, but by how you've healed, how you've forgiven, how you've endured, how you've stayed faithful. When it would have been easier to quit, that is the legacy of a chosen one. Not popularity, not titles, but transformation. You carry change within you. And everywhere you go, people sense it even if they don't know what to call it. Some will be drawn to you, others may reject you, but you are no longer swayed by either. Your eyes are fixed. Your spirit is grounded. You don't operate out of insecurity, but out of identity. You know who you are. And more importantly, you know whose you are. Romans 8:19 reminds us, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed." You are that revelation. Not perfect, not polished, but powerful in your obedience. You didn't come this far to shrink back. You didn't survive your breaking to hide your becoming. This world needs what you carry. It needs your story, your voice. Your light.so. Live boldly. Speak truth. Walk in peace. Be generous with your healing. And stay rooted in the one who called you, because you, dear one, are not a misfit. You are not a failure. You are not behind. You are the answer to someone's prayer, the vessel for God's glory, the testimony that grace still works. You're chosen, and your time is now.